Hey everybody, Rob from Karma Comment Chameleon coming at you today with a new ProRevenge story. Band screws over the producer. Let's jump right in. Check out my new channel, Canadian Rob's Workshop, link in the description down below. Here's another little tale from the days when I had my own production studio. My studio was located in a larger rehearsing and recording studio complex in South London. The studio manager had taken a local band under his wing and had given them free rehearsal and recording time in exchange for the band working in the facility, keeping things tidy, looking after incoming clients, yada yada. Essentially, they were treated as lackeys in return for free rehearsal and demo studio time. Now, these guys were seriously good. A really decent hard rock outfit who were all very talented young musicians. They also had zero attitude, something of a refreshing outlook in those days. One day, the keyboard player, Chris, and not his real name, came into my studio and told me that the studio manager had decided that it was time for them to put out their first single. To that end, their manager had forked out for 3 days in a frontline studio, together with the services of a very well-known producer. In other words, several thousand quids worth of investment. Cool, I thought, and about bloody time. Chris then asked me if I'd be interested in programming all his keyboard parts for the recording. Of course, I jumped at the opportunity. We laid out a plan of action. I had a fair number of synths in my studio that we used to supplement his keyboard arrangement. We'd record all the keyboard parts on the computer, around 20 tracks worth, and lay down guide drums, guitars, bass, and vocals on my 8-track tape recorder. By judicious use of timecode track, we could run all these keyboard parts in sync together with the guide tracks without having mixing them down to the 8-track. So we then spent 4 days working. The first 2 days were spent programming all the keyboard parts and creating the necessary voice patches. The other 2 days we worked on laying down both the keyboard parts into the computer and recording all the guide tracks. We then did rough mixdowns of both tracks for demo purposes. So far, so good. The next day, the producer rocks up at my studio and listens to the mixes. He then states he's not happy with the song's arrangements and demands they be restructured, much to the annoyance of Chris, who'd written both tracks. I said that rearranging the keyboard parts was fairly trivial. It's all on the computer after all, but we'd have to re-record all the guide tracks. Get it done. So another day to rearrange the keyboard parts to the producer's notes, and another day to re-record all the guide tracks, all the while thinking, well, that's another 2 days on the bill, bonus. Again, we produced rough mixes and finally got the grudging approval of the producer. Come the day of recording, I cart all the gear we'd used up to the studio. I laid down the timecode track onto the 24-track on the studio and patched in all the synth gear to the mixing desk, so that they could drive all the keyboard parts from the computer without having to lay them down or submix them onto the multitrack. For the curious, the drums occupied 12 tracks, guitar and bass 2 each, and there were 4 vocal tracks, 20 tracks in total. Another 2 were taken up with the rough mix as a guide, leaving 1 track spare. While I'm rigging everything, the producer was boasting about how he demanded the hire of a Lexicon 480L, at that time the preeminent digital reverb system, and one which cost a small fortune to hire, let alone purchase outright, about £15,000. It also became obvious that the producer and engineer were old cohorts and, judging by their demeanor, it was also clear that they were indulging in their predilection for Peruvian marching powder. 3 days later, I get the call that they're all finished and to come and collect my gear. By the time I get there in the evening, the only dude on duty is the tape operator. He asked if I'm interested in hearing the final mixes. Of course I am. So after loading all my kit into the van, I go back into the machine room to hear the results. I was horrified. Guitars so high in the mix it was obscuring the vocals sounding like strangulated chickens, the drums, the less said about them the better. Think flatulent warthog in a bath of custard. The bass, what bass, and the keyboard parts that I'd spent so much time on virtually non-existent. I was incensed and expressed my annoyance at the tape op, whilst reminding him that I was not having a go at him personally. I then took all the kit back to my studio and went to the pub for the calming influence of a large single malt. The next day, I'm in my studio sorting out some stuff when the phones go off. It's the producer, apoplectic with rage at the comments I'd expressed to the tape op. Holding the phone away from my ear, he was rather loud. I let him rant on until he ran out of steam. I then suggested he bring his tape down to the studio and compare it to my mix in front of the band and their manager and let them make a determination as to the relative merits of the two mixes. He bit, and the next day he shows up full of bluster and bravado. We adjourned to the main studio and played back both tapes to the assembled folks. Afterwards, the silence was palpable. The band expressed their opinion that my rough mixes were far better. The manager, however, said that he thought the producer's version was superior. Glancing at him, I could clearly see he was in a bit of a quandary. He'd just dropped the best part of £4,000 on the recording session and thus felt justified in his opinion. Even though it was apparent his real feelings went the other way, he wasn't about to lose face in front of the producer. I left them to their own devices. Frankly, I don't give a damn what you do as long as you pay my invoice. The next day, Chris pops into my studio and says that their manager is going with the producer's mix, despite the band's vehement objections, and is sending that tape to the processing plant. Fine, I said. Then Chris adopted a conspiratorial tone. We think your mixes are exactly what our sound should be. Can you give me the master tape? Sure, but why? He then said that he had been tasked with sending the tape to the pressing plant and, with the approval of the rest of the band, was going to substitute my rough mixes for the producer's version. Oh, delicious. Okay, but on your own head be it, you're responsible for the fallout. He readily agreed. Fast forward a couple of weeks, 1,000 copies of the press single have been delivered to the studio. I turn up and go into the main office to collect my mail. Sat there is the producer who, as soon as he saw me, adopted a smug expression. He then proceeded to slap the single onto the office's stereo system and proceed to crow about his talents as a producer, while expressing the opinion that I had a lot to learn. I politely listened while he ranted on, and once the record finished said, "I'm sorry, dear boy, but what you just heard was actually my mix. Perhaps if you spent less time indulging in the devil's dandruff, you might have noticed." Whereupon I discreetly withdrew to my own studio, to the sound of the producer howling like a Valkyrie on steroids. I learned later that the band had managed to sell virtually all of the singles at their subsequent gigs. Not bad for a rough mix. So the right people win in the end, but it still sounds like that producer got their name on a track that really was better than what they're able to put out themselves. OP mentioned in a comment that they were just happy to sit back and claim their paycheck. OP also didn't give out the name of the band when asked in the comments. Unfortunately, they stated it was over 30 years ago and they're just not relevant now. I want to thank OP for posting their story to the ProRevenge subreddit. You can visit them at the links in the description below. Please go there and give them an upvote. Once again, this is Rob from Karma Comment Chameleon saying thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share it with your friends. And we'll see you in the next one.